Welcome, everybody, to the Final Brand Podcast. I'm your host, Grant McGaw, and I want to bring a very special guest. And I think a lot of people are going to find this super interesting. And that is because we live in a world where numbers speak louder than people, and dashboards often replace judgment. So today, my guest is Dr. Mike Orkin, a distinguished statistician, professor, and consultant whose career has taken him from casino floors to corporate boardrooms, helping leaders to understand not just the numbers, but risk, randomness, and responsibility. Dr. Orkin has advised Fortune 100 companies, worked with gaming institutions that live and die by probability, and spent decades challenging the myths that we cling to about luck, certainty, and cause and effect. So, Dr. Orkin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, well, good to be here, Grant. Yeah, my name is Mike Orkin, and I'm as your introduction was perfect. You covered everything. I've been around for a while. I went to college at University of California at Berkeley, where I was a math major, planning to go to work in the tech industry, but then in graduate school, I was uh, excited to learn about randomness, probability, a lot of the, as you said in the intro, a lot of the myths that people have about risk and about chance and about skill versus chance, things like that. So
Well,
that's what
you've
I
written a
do.
book on that, right? You've got a book,
Yes, I have a book.
Story of Chance.
Yeah, the story of chance beyond the margin of error. And
Uh-huh.
if you like to read things like and about public opinion polls and stuff, they always talk about something called the margin of error. And
Yeah.
the margin of error is this region in which things happen according to the way they're supposed to happen. Namely, in a public opinion poll, uh, the result is given within a margin of error so that you can be pretty sure that the result is accurate. But every now and then, things behind the scenes go outside the margin of error, and you know it's no longer accurate. So um, you have to always take into account randomness. Another area of where the margin of error comes in effect is when you have to make decisions in statistics like, is this the result of chance or is it the result of skill? Is this correlation due to just some random observation or is it due to some cause and effect thing? And so statistical techniques generally allow you to make decisions like, yes, it is due to chance. No, it's not due to chance within a certain margin of error in the sense that every now and then you things don't go your way. You get what's called a false positive, and I'm sure anyone in the medical profession has heard about false positives because even when you do clinical trials, every now and then you'll get a false positive, which means that things are really the result that looks like something is happening is really just due to chance.
Well, I tell you, and so we're going to pack a lot of what you just talked about because it's very, very important, especially now in this AI generated world. We have a lot of data, we have a lot of information. And here's my question around that because you brought up something because randomness, all these probabilities, all these things lead to maybe it's the outcome you're looking for, but maybe not. And the question comes down to why do smart, well intentioned leaders so often make bad decisions when the data looks right? How does that happen?
Well, um, so sometimes even well-intentioned leaders will make mistakes, and sometimes leaders aren't so well-intentioned, and they have their own personal vested interests.
Mhm.
But let me give you an example. There's this notion of correlation. When are things related to each other? And oftentimes, people who are in positions of a great authority mistake that for meaning causation.
Mhm.
And since we've talked, we're sort of skirting the medical area. Let me give you an example from there. So when the polio vaccine was first being developed back in the late 1950s, um, a researcher discovered this correlation, a high correlation, which means there's a relationship. And the relationship was that as Coca-Cola sales go up, so does polio incidence. In other words, um, and the conclusion that this researcher drew from this was that somehow soft drink sales are causing polio. And that was so it's certainly possible that that was happening, but the person was mistaking correlation for causation. So when you see a relationship, it doesn't mean causation. And what really was the case was that there's a variable in the background that you couldn't see, and that was the weather. And as the weather gets warmer, two things happen. More soft drinks are sold because people drink more liquids in the warm weather, and the polio virus gets more active in the warm weather. So it had nothing to do with Coca-Cola or any soft drink causing polio. It was a background thing where it was just the weather that was causing this. So that's a sort of a very common mistake. There was another one in another similar mistake in that general area, um, in which some studies were done that showed that seemed to show that well, no, it did show that there's a correlation between smoking. I'm sorry, between drinking alcohol and lung cancer.
Right.
And so there is such a correlation, just like there is a correlation between the weather, I mean, between soft drink sales and polio. Um, but it turns out that drinking lots of alcohol is not necessarily a healthy thing to do. But the reason that it looked like drinking lots of alcoholic beverages was causing lung cancer was because when people drink alcoholic beverages, they're more likely to smoke, and it's the smoking that causes lung cancer. So people make that kind of a mistake all the time. They take correlation in the federal. So let's move to another area briefly.
Yeah.
The Federal Reserve, um, which controls interest rates, and which is always in the news because President Trump wants the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, and the chair of the Fed, Jerome Powell, doesn't want to do that, and he's been around for a while, and so is, of course, President Trump. But in the background here, the Fed has been using from time to time. It's largely discredited now. This data from it's called the Phillips curve. It's
Yeah.
a graph from it's from 19th century England, and it's about inflation. It says that as employment goes up, I mean as unemployment goes up, inflation goes down. So they've been using that, but you can't. The Fed can't just cause unemployment. They can't fire people. So what they do is they raise interest rates, thinking that that will cause more unemployment, which it didn't. But
Mhm.
the fact is, it's just another one of these correlation things, and it's also a correlation that's based on 19th century data from England. What that got to do with the United States economy is not clear at all. In the last couple of years, people have sort of discredited the Phillips curve because it doesn't work, for one thing. And for another thing, it's one of these situations where correlation, in this case between unemployment and inflation, doesn't mean causation. Depends on lots of other variables.
I agree with you, Dr. Orkin, because I've been in technology a long time and I see the data might say this or that. And what you don't have is I see this a lot of times. I'm big into football, right? So I like
Yeah, yeah,
NFL. I like watching it. They're big into statistics, right? They love
right.
statistics. There's a statistic for everything on passing, on running, on block, but they don't take into account the will of that individual, the humanity of that person, because that person maybe they were running a certain way, for a certain amount of time, maybe it's 5 seconds, let's say. But because they're willed to do it even faster because of whatever the situation is, now it's 4.5. It changes the whole formula. Everything changes. So the pattern becomes upset and it's not the same way. Now, here's the question why I bring that up is that because it could be dangerous if there's an illusion in the data that creates some kind of opportunity for decision makers, and they're looking at these dashboards and everybody got their dashboard and that tells you what's in front of you, how I'm going to get to this next level. But here's the question: why are they so easily fooled by the data that's telling them, like you just said, the potential for causation, but it could be totally different?
Well, I'll tell you, so the psychological factor in sports I completely agree with you. It's very important. You just watch any weekend of NFL games and you'll see it in action when some teams, um, you can tell they get together and they decide they're going to win. And I mean, of course, you have to have talented players too, but um, but I'll tell you to speak to your question, which is, in my opinion, extremely important. People like to be locked into numbers. Um, they're they take up everybody, I mean, myself included. Um, but you just have to be careful because um, there's this thing of a psychological thing of having numbers that you fix onto, and it somehow helps you feel better about what you're looking at. Like what you said, it's hard to it's much harder to pin down psychological factors and the factors of wanting to win or needing to win and this and that in a football game than it is to look at the stats. And so it's comforting to be able to look at the stats. And now it's because of um, technology and artificial intelligence and stuff. It's easy. You can just and to the technology of putting stuff up on the screen. So it's easy to have all kinds of numbers describing what's going on, and that's great. But it may not always be telling the story.
100%. Now,
Yeah.
now let's take that to the real world, right? And what we're talking about now, you have advised casino operators, gambling operations, right? And you've advised Fortune 100 teams. And here's the deal, like, what do they understand about risk? Because risk, there is risk in all of these things that for the most part, most of us, especially small business owners, they don't really understand. How does that really play out in that type of scenario?
Well, let's look at a casino first. Um, casino games, for the most part, some are a little bit different, but for the most part, are games in which you do the same thing over and over again. That's called independent trials, and the probabilities always remain the same. So, like rolling dice, roulette, playing a roulette wheel, where you're spinning the wheel and dropping a ball in. All these games have certain mathematical characteristics, namely even though you might get lucky from bet to bet or from roll to roll of the dice or from spin to spin with the roulette wheel, they're all governed by what's called the law of averages, which says that if you have a situation like this, not all situations are like that. Football game's not like that. But if you have a situation where you're doing the same thing independently over and over, and the probabilities always stay the same, you don't know what's going to happen. When I bet on seven, when I roll the dice, I don't know what's going to happen. I have a 1/6 chance of winning the bet and a 5/6 chance of losing the bet. And if I win, I get paid 4-to-1 payoff odds. But if I make this bet over and over and over again, the law of averages is a mathematical fact that says I will actually win about 1/6 of the time and lose about 5/6 of the time.
Okay.
There's no getting around it. There's no trick. And well, of course, you can cheat, but that's not a good idea in a casino. But the casino owners, therefore, have games like this because it doesn't matter to them if somebody comes in and gets lucky, which is going to happen. All they care about is the total action. over time. If lots of people are playing, then they know they're going to make a certain percentage profit of every dollar bet in the long run, which is about 17% for betting on seven and craps. Now, there are certain things that can get in the way of that. One of them is, let's say Elon Musk goes in and wants to bet $1 billion on seven, which
Yeah.
he can afford to do. Well, that could really screw up a small casino and make them go broke if they let him do that, because casinos can't take if he gets lucky, can't absorb a loss of $1 billion like that. So casinos have betting limits,
Mm-hmm.
and so they won't let him do something like that. In a typical casino at a craps table, you can bet up to 500 or maybe $1,000 on a single bet.
Yeah.
So that means everything is governed and controlled, and so the law of averages can come into play. Now the same thing goes for the player, because if you're playing a game over and over again in which there's a skill factor, like blackjack,
Yeah.
for example. Blackjack, Ed Thorpe wrote a book in 1960 or so about some computer simulations that IBM programmers did. This is a long time ago. You couldn't just have it. There was no such thing as a personal computer then. And he looked at these computer simulations and found a winning strategy for blackjack. You have to do something called count cards.
Yeah.
And so, and then if in that case, when you play under ideal conditions, which have changed a little bit since then, the player has an advantage over the casino. Now, the same rules apply in a sense, and that is, even though you have a game with what's known as positive EV, or positive EV stands for expected value, let's say I have a 60% chance of winning every time I bet and a
Yeah.
40% chance of losing, and I get the payoff odds are 1 to 1. So that means I have an advantage and I'll make money if I keep doing this. Well, suppose I have $10,000 and I bet it all on the first bet because I know I have a winning game.
Yeah.
Well, there's a 40% chance I'll go broke. And if I go broke, I can't keep playing. So you need to have the long run in view when you're going to take risks, even if you have a positive expected value, or what happens to you on the average over time. And so a lot of people don't understand that, and they go broke when they don't have to. They can they have a good game, they can keep playing, but their systems, and someone named John Kelly at the time of J.L. Kelly, I guess were his initials, around the time of Thorpe, back in the late 1950s, was a mathematician at Bell Labs, did a mathematical result called the Kelly system, which says that in games like even where games where you have an advantage, you have to control the amount you bet, and that amount is based on the fraction of your bankroll. So
Mm-hmm.
what that means is the more you have, the more you bet, the less you have, the less you bet. So this whole idea of doubling down to cover your losses is a total disaster. Never works. You keep doing it.
Monday night, people don't know today is Monday, and people are trying to hedge their bet. Like, I got to make up for my betting on Sunday. You're saying
Right.
that
Yeah.
might not work.
You don't double your bet. You don't double down to cover your losses. I don't care if it's in a casino or if it's in a political situation. They always talk about doubling down. It's
Yeah.
just not a good idea. Now, people can get lucky. There's no question about that. But in repeated play of a game, luck disappears, and you have
Let's
only
turn that to business now, because now you
okay.
talk about obviously casino is a business for the for businesses. They use statistics all the time, probabilities all the time. They look at their numbers, your P&L, your stocks. All these things are measurements of activity, and you're saying repeated activity in a controlled system will have a certain value over and over again. what does like a small business owner do they play by these rules? Maybe they're not aware of these rules, but you see in these big corporations, are they aware? Are they, in your opinion, or are they not?
I think they are. I think in the big corporations they are, but I think you'll find, well, this brings up another point that's related, and that is there are some people who will get started in their business or suddenly make a big bet and have it pay off, and they'll be successful. And it's just because they're lucky. Now, I think that in any big corporation, people sort of understand the dynamics of risk taking to some extent.
Mhm.
But let me give you an example that's not really in big business. Um, the Mega Millions lottery. So that's one of the more popular lotteries, and there's a guaranteed $50 million payoff if your ticket is the winner. And there, the chance of winning the Mega Millions lottery is about 1 in 290 million. And that's kind of crazy because if you buy 50 tickets a week, you'll win the jackpot about once every 100,000 years, 112,000 years. So it's not it's so buying a lottery is a game of pure chance. It's like you're not. It's not like having a business where there's skill involved and there's your smarts and your employees' smarts and knowledge of how that business works can lead to success. It's just pure chance. But there's this interesting thing to observe. Even with the Mega Millions lottery, there are winners. There are jackpot winners from time to time. So who are those people? How come there are winners of a game that's so terrible, in which your chance of winning is 1 in 290 million, in which mathematically, if you buy 50 tickets a week, you'll win the jackpot once every 112,000 years? How is that possible? Well, the answer is simple. It's because so many tickets are sold. And so that's one of the interesting features of randomness or chance, and that is given enough opportunity,
Mhm.
any weird thing will happen just due to chance. So that's why they're winners. It's not because they have any particular skill. It's not because they saw the winning numbers in their oatmeal that morning. It's because they were part of a much bigger crowd of people buying tickets. And so I like to say that luck is a group activity in a game of pure chance like that, or in any situation. And for in Mega Man's lottery, if you look at the big picture, for every winner, there are about 290 million losers.
I don't
And so
know.
that's in the background. So that's true in business too. There are some people in business are very smart, and there's some in business take big risks. But there's a back in this and there's always a background of people who don't really succeed. And that's partially due to skill. So one of the interesting questions that I've worked on as a research question is, and with in a lot of consulting that I've done, is what's the difference between luck and skill?
Yes.
So um, that's sort of a statistical question. And when you just look at the luck situation, things are very understandable, like the lottery, for example. But when you mix skill in with it, it becomes a different story. And it becomes sort of like what you were talking about a little while ago, namely professional sports. So in a professional football team, you have skill, but there's also luck. People uh, fumble, they get injuries, they don't, they're not up to play that day or whatever. So there's a mixture of luck and skill. And that's one of the fascinating things about that. But
I love what you just said there because that's the problem. It's like a snapshot in time where the numbers you're looking at actually make sense, right? So it's like, all right, if everything stays the same, your probability will probably, the outcome will probably be very predictable. But we
right,
all know that in our experience, we wake up every day, there's always something happened that we didn't anticipate. There are variables. And as we get into artificial intelligence and we start to ingratiate it into our business processes, we have to understand, like you just said, what is repeatable and predictable as opposed to something that's more probabilistic. It could happen or probably can happen. And the question comes down to, especially in your experience, when does that data stop being a guide and becomes more of a liability if you're depending on that?
Well, that's a very good question, and it doesn't have an easy answer, of course, but it's a question that people have to think about if they're risking money in business or whatever. They have to think about um, not most real life situations are not going into the casino and rolling the dice over and over again. It's much, much, much more complicated than that, and it involves um, doing things, as you were just saying, that change every day. So when you have this shifting landscape, that's when the people who are just relying on getting lucky sort of fall by the wayside, and the skilled players, whether it's football or business or whatever, if skill is allowed, then the skill eventually starts taking over. Now, I have a warning. Um, some people, this is about AI.
Yeah,
And the warning is some people have discovered recently that, well, people are always complaining about AI, these large language models having what are called hallucinations,
yeah,
where they look at, try to find things and the things aren't there, so they make stuff up. And in fact, so there are situations like there was a court case where it turned out that one of the lawyers was using AI to find cases related to this case. And AI couldn't find any, so they just made up these cases, completely fictitious. But now they found something even more sort of worrisome, and that is large language models are based on these using the entire internet, all that data. You have to have these big data centers, and it makes decisions in part based on correlations.
hmm,
And these correlations don't mean causation, as we talked about earlier. And
right.
they start making decisions based on the notion that correlations mean causation. And in fact, there's a well-known person who talks about this kind of thing, who talks about AI as an AI skeptic, not about the fact that it does lots of good things, but about there are these little things you have to worry about. And his name is Gary Marcus, and he has a podcast newsletter. And he discovered that, like, the AI will just fixate on numbers. We were talking about that before. So it's not just people. AI fixates on numbers when it makes correlations with things, and will make wrong decisions based on the fact that it's just looking at these numbers that are correlated but don't mean causation.
Yeah,
Give you another example, and let me give you one more example of something we were talking about a few minutes ago, and that is um, betting too much than you should be betting, even if you have a winning game. So I don't know if you've heard the crypto king of a few years ago was this guy named Sam Bankman-Fried,
yeah,
SP they called him, and he had a big one of the biggest crypto trading websites um, there was, and he was this brilliant young guy who got a degree in math and physics from MIT and started this business, and he was a billionaire before he was 30. And so then suddenly it turned out he was borrowing money from his investors to invest in more crypto stuff, risking
yeah.
crypto bets, and he wound up where he is right now as a cellmate of Diddy.
Right.
Same. I don't know if he's not still in that same prison, but in prison for like 35 years. And so this guy named Zeke Foe wrote a book, good book, about you're interested in that stuff, called Number Go Up, in which he had many, many interviews with SBF before he went to prison. And SBF knew about positive EV, namely, you have positive expected value. So that means it's a good bet in the world of probability and risk taking. And so what he did was exactly what I was talking about. um, before, and that is he had positive EV, so but he didn't know about the Kelly system or about not betting that it was possible to bet too much money because he thought he was so smart. He would identify, and he admitted it in these interviews, these positive, but he didn't even know what he was admitting. So he would bet tons of money on good bets, but the fact that he was betting so much money caused him to eventually, every now and then you lose. And when you lose, it really hurts if you're not betting a reasonable amount. And so what did he do? He borrowed from his investors, borrowed in
Yeah.
quotes, and wound up down that slippery slope.
Those are great truths that you just talked about, and understanding the numbers really, they don't lie. They just are what they are. And if you misinterpret them, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. And we need to understand that, I believe. And
Right.
we talk about decision making, and you have to understand no matter how advanced these tools become, you've got to use some wisdom and experience and some context around this, because there's real world harm when you get confused around correlation and causation. And I'm getting that from you, especially like in very important things like in healthcare and finance and public policy. This is very important, that you just alluded to, many, many different things that we've talked about during this podcast. So if a leader had only one habit, I'm speaking to you, if a leader only had one habit to protect themselves from being misled by data, what should it be?
Well, so I'll give you two answers. The first answer is this sort of sort of my basic rule for being, in that world is to not bet too much money, even if you have a good bet, is to just take it easy and play for the long run. Because even if you don't think you're playing for the long run, you are, because that's what happens. You do things over time. That's how life is. Um, my second answer to your question is hire some experts.
Yeah, I like that.
Hire some statisticians.
No,
Although not all statisticians are, statisticians just like any other group of people. Some of them are really smart, some of them aren't so smart.
well, you
That's
got to
just
understand the numbers. What is the tea leaves really telling you?
right.
To your point, because even though you have a calculator, what is it calculating? AI is a giant calculator. People don't think they really understand what's happening in the background. It's a gigantic calculator. It does probabilistic. There's deterministic and probabilistic. If you don't mind, because you're a statistician, give our audience first, help from your definition. How do you determine or define deterministic versus probabilistic?
Well, so let me give you a physics answer. When Sir Isaac Newton was around a few hundred years ago and his contemporaries, they thought that the world was governed like a giant, the world worked like a giant clock. That is, everything was mechanical. And if you knew, and there may be some parts of the clock you don't understand, but that's okay. Eventually you'll understand them. And so you could understand everything in the world. So in the eyes of Sir Isaac Newton, who discovered amazing things about how objects move around, to gravity and inertia and acceleration, all these things that he and others discovered. I mean, it goes back to the ancient Greeks when Archimedes discovered a buoyancy in water and how objects float and things like that. So that was all deterministic. You could tell if you do something, like if you drop an apple from the tree, you know what's going to happen. Okay, but then in the beginning, it's still my physics analogy here, the beginning of the 20th century, people started discovering that that didn't always happen, that there's stuff called quantum physics, where subatomic particles, don't behave the way that they did in classical mechanics. And so there were some physicists, even Einstein was forced to, who didn't want to admit that, was forced to admit that things weren't always deterministic. And so, for example, there's something called the Heisenberg uncertainty principle.
Yeah.
Heisenberg was a physicist around the turn of the 20th century. And he discovered that for subatomic particles, you can't, by measuring them, tell both their location and their momentum or speed. And it's impossible. You just can't tell that there's this random component. And if you
Mhm.
nail one down, the other starts getting fuzzy. And so there's this inherent randomness to things, um, not necessarily to my bowling ball when I roll it down the bowling alley, although my bowling ball is going to be more random than someone who knows how to bowl real well. But still, that's different than a subatomic particle. Well, when computers were first developed, they were based on what are called random number generators, which are really just called, were also called pseudo random number generators because they wouldn't really do things completely at random. So this goes to what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
But then just recently, well, recently in the last 30 years or so, there's this notion of quantum computers, and you read about it in the news all the time,
It's big.
where they're
Yeah.
based on, and they can do things much faster because of quantum theory. They're not commercially available yet, but if they were, they would be able to do things much faster because of this random component when it's used properly. Now, not only so recently there's an article that someone just sent me this morning about how at the University of Colorado they've actually developed um, a random number generator that's really a random number generator. It's based on quantum mechanics. It's not a quantum computer yet, but it's just something that generates really truly random numbers. So there is right now, in reality, there's a world where deterministic physics, for example, works. It may not be 100% what's really going on, but it
Yeah.
works. I mean, Sir Isaac Newton and Archimedes and all the famous physicists going all the way back uh, to the ancient Greeks, their things work to some extent. But now there's this whole new vision of the work, how things work in reality, or how things are, where on the subatomic level that just doesn't work anymore. So there is this difference between things happening, things being uncertain and random, and things working according to some deterministic rules.
This is so important, and I want our audience to truly understand what you're talking. Some things are determined. 1 + 1 = 2. Some things are probabilistic, meaning 1 + 1 could equal 2, could also equal 3. What do I mean by equaling 3 in my mind? Because I took physics as well. Is that, let's say you take Dr. Orkin here, he's 1. You take me, I'm Grant McGaw, I am 1. Now, separately, no, 1 = 2. But when we come together, a third reality takes shape. We call that this podcast and what we're talking about. It's a third reality. It can go, there's some deterministic factors to it, but there's some probabilistic. He doesn't know exactly what question I'm going to ask and that type of thing. I don't exactly know what the answers are going to be. There is going to be probably there's a certain certainty that's going to be in a certain realm of a percentage of correctness, if that's the case we want to use. But we need to understand this because real life actually works like this. And we need to understand this as we go deeper into this automation, I believe, and I'll call it remote or robotic process automation or agentic AI. We're starting to give more control over to our machines. I want to ask you this. This is my last question I'll ask you right now. If you were advising leaders preparing for this next decade, you see where we're moving toward, what warning would you give them about over trusting data, and what would you urge them to develop instead?
Well, I don't. I think AI is something that's going to be here. It's here, and businesses are using it because it works very well in many situations. Like call centers will soon be run completely by AI. There's no getting around it. Um, and I would just, the thing that you have to be careful of is that AI, so this, I'm not talking about the AI that's behind the development that's in a weapon system or something, which can
Yeah.
get very dangerous. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying for a typical business situation, we're using AI like you would um, use it for a call center or even for people working in a company that programmers, for example. AI does programming really well. And in fact, um, there's some AI systems, one's called Claude,
Yeah.
um, that really do. I have friends who use it for programming all the time, and so you have to sort of know something about programming before you start using it. And so if you're in a business and you see all these unbelievable things that AI is doing, that's great. I mean, you're going to use it. But you have to be careful that you have someone around you who um, understands the limitations and understands the types of mistakes it can make. Because AI can make mistakes just like people make mistakes. And so I think that you just need to have people around you um, who really understand that. And I don't think that the head of a company has to be an expert in technology. I mean, maybe if you're in Silicon Valley, yeah, but you have to have somebody who knows what's going on. I wouldn't just put in an AI system based on what some salesman told me. You have to have people around and know what you're doing. A famous statistician who I knew a long time ago. I mean, he was he was a professor, a sort of finishing up professor when I was a graduate student. His name was John Tukey, and he was a very brilliant guy. And he used to say that an expert is someone who can think with other people's brains. And what he meant by that was, if you're running a company, have people around you who know what they're doing and know how to use that.
I think you're absolutely right. And what we're getting, when you're in a linear world, linear, but it's a holistic reality, meaning we only
Mhm.
know things over sometimes through experience, which is over time, you get to know what something truly is. Like when you're far away from something, like, oh, I think that's a hill. I think that's a tree over that hill. As you get closer and closer to it, it is. Or as you get closer and closer to it, you find it was a picture of a hill, right?
Yeah,
It wasn't a hill of itself. We're going to find this out as we start going down this road. And I love what you said. You need to have somebody on your team who understands the difference between what a hill is and what a
right,
picture of a hill is.
right,
Why
right.
that's very important, because the machine, if you're driving a car, right? If it's a picture of a hill, like, well, it's not big, but if it's an actual hill, you might need, more machinery or whatever to get over that hump. You need to
That's right.
understand those things. And I've been in technology for 30 some odd plus years, and I will bring this to my audience. The number one problem that I always found when we deployed technology is that we just never had enough, or we did not take into account the training of the individuals that are going to be utilizing the technology. So and because of that, the workflows would be different, the outcomes would be different. And now they blame it on the tech, but really it wasn't the tech. It's just you didn't take into account all the variables that are necessary to get to that particular outcome. And some of these things we just don't know.
Right. Well, that's true with that. That's especially important today because of AI. Um, Even people who are experts in AI don't really understand it, and don't understand it maybe as much as as they will in 10 years. And people who are like I used to do a lot of programming. I've written search engines and stuff before, um, but the methods for doing for programming in AI using neural nets and stuff like that, it's not something I know how to do. And it would take a while to learn. And in fact, like I was just saying, nowadays people don't even take a while to learn. They just use AI to write programs in AI. So it's become a different ballgame, and one in which um, AI is going to certainly be important, but in which you need to have someone on your team who really knows what they're doing. I want to make a brief comment about
Sure.
something you said a few minutes ago about when you're going over a hill, you have a picture of a tree or an actual tree. I think that's what you said.
Sure.
Um, so there was this famous um, painter in the 19th century. His name was, in the beginning of the 20th century, he's one of the surrealists, like around the time of Salvador Dali. His name was Magritte, Magritte, French, maybe he was Dutch guy. But anyway, he had this famous paint. He has this famous painting. It's in some museum somewhere of a pipe and a picture, like if you smoke a pipe.
Yeah.
And then the caption on the painting is, "This is not a pipe." And the reason for that caption is it's a picture of a pipe.
It's funny.
But it's a very famous painting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You got to look at those things. This is so
Yeah.
important. I really enjoyed our discussion. And I want to ask you this question because I love asking this question of my guests in the moment. You've been through a lot of podcasts. You had a lot of interviews. You're talking a lot about your book. It's your first experience on the Follow Brand podcast. How did you feel about this interview?
I really liked it. I thought this was a great interview. I've had to, this is in the top echelon of interviews.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. And now you got to tell us how to get a hold of your book because I think a lot of people are going to want to peel into that.
Yeah. So my book is The Story of Chance Beyond the Margin of Error, and by Michael Orkin, and you can get it on Amazon. They have it. They sometimes have it, sometimes don't on Barnes and Noble. So I wouldn't recommend Barnes and Noble for this book. So Amazon has it, or you can go to my website, drmikeorkin.com. That's drmikeorkin.com, and there's instructions there on how to get the book.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I tell you, Dr. Mike, this has been a wonderful interview. I've learned a great deal. I'm sure the audience listening have learned a great deal as well. I encourage your entire audience to tune in to all the episodes of Follow the Brand. They can do so at my website. That's the number 5. That's STARBDM. That's for branddevelopmentmasters.com. I want to thank you again and much success in 2026.
Well, thank you so much, and same to you. And I'll put up a link to your stuff on my website.
I love to hear that. You take care.
Okay.